Hi, my name's Mel and welcome back to Bookish Brummie. So today I thought that we might have a chat about one of my favourite Richard Bachman books, which is Thinner. So Richard Bachman is the pseudonym for Stephen King. There were 7 books published under this pseudonym, but there's only 6 available now because Stephen King asked for Rage to be removed from publication. But the 7 books were Rage, The Long Walk, The Running Man, Roadwork, Thinner, The Regulators and Blaze. So I've read 5 of the 7 now. I haven't read Blaze yet and I haven't read The Regulators. In fact, with The Regulators I'm currently trying to get hold of it and I'm having quite a few difficulties with it because I'm trying to collect this storyteller range because I just like the way that they look on the shelf with all the rainbow spines. And with The Regulators, I've ordered it for the 4th time, so I'm hoping this time it gets delivered to get the right one, because the other 3 I've ordered, even though I've ordered from Waterstones and Amazon, they've shown the picture with the ISBN for the storyteller cover, but that's not what's been delivered to me. I've been delivered ones with different covers, so they've all been good enough to take them back and refund me. It's just a little bit frustrating, but yeah. So I haven't quite finished reading all the Bachman books, but so far, out of the ones that I've read, which are 5 of them, Thinner is actually my favourite one at the moment. So we haven't got any recent film for this at the moment. I think the last time a film was made of this was in 1996. And I don't think it got very good reviews. I personally haven't seen it. I didn't even know that a film existed until I googled it today before I started this video. But I do think that the book is really, really good, and I think actually it would make a very good film. So if they ever were thinking about doing a remake of it, I'd be up for watching that. And I think it would have been a good one for the spooky season as well, because I think this book is really, really creepy. So this book was published in 1984, and that's roughly around about the time that it was discovered that Richard Bachman was Stephen King. I'm not sure if it was before the book was published or after the book was published, but as I've read all the ones that were published up until Thinner, so Blaze and The Regulators were published quite a bit after Thinner, and those are the 2 that I haven't read. So I've read all of the ones up until Thinner and with Thinner, and I would say that going through Thinner, even though I knew that Stephen King had written that book, if I didn't know that and I had just been given the book plain with no author on the cover, I would have guessed that Stephen King wrote that book, because it's very much his style, and he also reuses some of the terminology that I think that he reuses through some of his books, and it's difficult for me to sort of think off the top of my head now exactly what he reused, but there was one phrase called wool gathering that he reused, and I've just come across that phrase in Pet Sematary, which I'm reading right now, and there's always sodium arc lights everywhere, but also one of the key things in this book again, which is sort of the same with most Stephen King novels, is they always seem to centre around Maine. So in this novel, the main character, who is called Bill Halleck, he doesn't start off in Maine, he actually starts off in Connecticut, but he travels to Maine. So yeah, Maine always plays a big part in Stephen King's novels, and I felt that the way that this one was written, it just pinpointed Stephen King's style a lot more than the earlier ones, Rage and Roadwork and The Running Man and The Long Walk, did. Those were very, very good novels, but I felt that there was something a lot grittier about them, and something a little bit darker almost. I do actually really want to do a review on the Bachman book, so I'm not going to say too much more about why I think that they are a little bit darker from maybe Thinner and possibly the 2 later ones, which I haven't read yet, but when I've finished reading those, then we'll talk about them all together as a collective. But anyway, I don't think I would have been surprised if I had read Thinner as under the name Richard Bachman and then found out later that it was written by Stephen King. So yeah, as it's my favourite so far that I've written, and I also really highly rate it among all the Stephen King books, so I wanted to have a bit of a chat about it, to be honest. I am going to go into details in the book, and I am going to talk about the ending. So again, if you haven't read this book and you actually really want to and you don't know what the ending is, then maybe watch this video after you finish reading the book, because then you can see, you're not going to get disappointed by me doing a reveal that you might not want to know. Now, what I've noticed with most of the Stephen King books that I've read so far, he's very, very good at the in-between. So he's very good at setting the story to begin with and pulling you in, and he's very good at creating characters that you really like and that you're interested in, that, you know, then you want them to succeed at the end of the book. And he's really good at sort of amping up the story and the suspense, and, you know, really getting you into the book so that you just turn the pages and you don't want to go to bed or go to work or do anything really other than read the book. The one thing he's not been particularly wonderful at throughout, I think, his whole career is landing the ending. Sometimes the endings can be a little bit lacking, but this doesn't really bother me so much in the main part, because I think that I enjoy the journey of the book so much, because there's so much, like, I'm so invested in the characters and, you know, how the story's actually going, that if the ending falls a little bit flat, I don't severely sort of mark it down, because he's done such a good job in the rest of the book. However, in this book, I think that he's absolutely nailed the landing of the ending absolutely brilliantly. So I actually would rate this one a 5-star. Again, which sort of, I think, warrants a conversation about it. I would definitely read it again. I read it most recently a couple of months ago for the first time. And yeah, I was really, really pleased that I read it. So let's get into what the general gist of the story is. So obviously the book is called Thinner, so we assume that somebody's getting thinner or that someone's going to lose weight. So what actually happens is we have our main character, who is called Bill Halleck, and he is a lawyer working in Connecticut. And he, at the start of the book, before his descent into the curse that's set upon him, he weighs 250 pounds. So he's actually quite a tall guy. Like, we get that from descriptions of him in the book and how he describes himself, but he's still classed as quite grossly overweight, obese, you know. So his doctors always would want him to lose weight, but he also really likes his food, and that comes across in the book. Like, he likes eating. He always has, you know, second helpings, sometimes third helpings, and he thinks nothing of, you know, driving up to a shop, picking up dessert, eating it in his car, and then having another dessert later on. So he's not exactly disciplined with food. So that's sort of like the start that we need to think that, you know, he's actually quite a big guy and he's quite overweight, working as a lawyer. Now, what happens is that he's out driving with his wife, who is called Heidi Halleck, and they're sort of in the town, and for some unknown reason, Heidi decides that she is going to do a sexual favour for Bill while he's driving the car. He doesn't ask her to. She just starts doing it. She's never done that in the entirety of their marriage, and he has no idea what has possessed her, because he obviously thinks about this throughout the book, like, you know, how did I actually get to where I am? Why did she do that? It's not something that she would normally do, especially not in the car. But anyway, she does. And while that's happening, he gets distracted, and a lady called Susanna Lemp, she's an elderly lady, I think she's in about her 80s, she steps out between two cars and gets hit by Bill Halleck in his car, and he ends up killing her. So she's killed by vehicular manslaughter, which is an absolute tragedy. So he has to go to court, and there's a hearing, but because he has the position that he does as a lawyer, and he lives in a fairly small town, and he's constantly in the court trying criminals for various things, he has a relationship with the police chief and the judge. And we find out throughout the story that after this accident has happened, he was never breathalyzed. He wasn't really investigated too much by the police on the scene. They didn't want to believe that you know, he was under the influence or anything like that, but they decided not to, you know, do the breathalyzer or take any samples from him, because they didn't want to prove that maybe he had, although we know that he hadn't. And he, you know, it's just put down to he had a terrible accident, lost concentration for a moment, and has therefore ended up ending this lady's life. Anyway, the judge, Carrie Rossington, and the police chief, in the evidence that he gives, who is called Duncan Hopley, they don't really push very hard for a conviction for Bill, and he actually gets off scot-free. It's seen as an accident. So he gets to walk out of court free, doesn't do any prison time, you know. So it's a little bit corrupt, and Bill knows that, but he feels relief, obviously, that he's going home to his wife, and he also has a 14-year-old daughter himself called Linda. So what had happened when he left the courthouse. There was an elderly man who was like waiting on the steps, and his face was sort of rotting away, and he really sort of repulsed Bill, and Bill tried to stay away from him. But the elderly man touched his face and he said the word thinner, and that was about it. Now Bill sort of has a few sort of nightmares about this because he's just revolted by the guy just because he was so disfigured and didn't really want to be touched by him, and I think he's sort of pretty traumatised by the whole event anyway, so has a couple of dreams about this guy but doesn't think anything more of it until a little bit later. Now the story starts off like this has already happened, this car accident has already happened, and Bill has already got off with no conviction, and this man has already touched him. Now we learn that the man who touched him is actually a guy called Tadeusz Lemke, and he is actually the father of Susanna Lemke, who was hit by the car, but Bill doesn't know this at the time, and actually Tadeusz is also quite elderly, so originally Bill thinks that must be Suzanne's husband, doesn't realise it's actually the father because he's like over 100 years old. Anyway, it starts off sort of in the way where Bill is in the family home with Heidi and Linda, you know, and they're eating, and he's just sort of commenting that he's lost weight or whatever. His wife comments that he's lost weight, and over a couple of weeks he starts shifting, you know, a few pounds. To begin with, this doesn't have a huge effect on him because he's already quite severely overweight, so he doesn't really think anything of it. But after a couple of weeks, I think he's dropped like maybe a stone, it's like 14 pounds or 20 pounds or whatever. His wife starts to comment like, oh, you know, like, what are you doing exactly? You are beginning to look thinner, and he's noticing actually that he's having to use the lower hole on his belt because that weight loss is becoming more significant. So he's like, oh, I'm not really doing anything actually. So he's still having second helpings, he's not doing any extra exercise or anything like that. The weight's just falling off him and he's kind of like grateful for it. His wife, on the other hand, takes a different sort of stance on it and says, well, I don't see you doing anything to lose weight, and you're not really eating any differently, and I'm a little bit concerned because actually unexplained weight loss could mean that you've got some kind of disease or illness, so I really want you to go to the doctors, I want you to get checked out because I'm worried. And he tries to put her off, you know, he's like, everything is absolutely fine, and she's like, well, prove it. So, you know, after a couple more weeks and the pounds really start falling off, and he sort of has to agree, like, yeah, I'm not actually really doing anything to warrant this weight loss, so I should check it out. But again, he wants to stay positive because he doesn't want to think there's something wrong with me. He goes to the doctors. The doctor is, you know, your wife's quite right, we need to do some tests, you've lost a significant amount of weight now. They do the test, the results come back, and he's fit as a fiddle. They cannot find anything wrong with him, but the doctor is like, well, we'll keep an eye on it because, you know, it doesn't seem right, but, you know, your body's telling me that everything is fine, you've been fitter than you've ever been, so we'll take it. However, a couple more weeks pass and the weight loss just really is sort of continuing at quite a drastic rate, and it really starts to begin to worry Bill a little bit because he's like, well, the tests are coming back negative, but I'm really not doing anything to warrant this. So he starts to wonder if the man who touched him on the face and said thinner at him has done something to him, you know, and he's quite quick to think it's a curse. He doesn't sort of think anything else other than this man must have put a curse on me. And I think that's pretty good in a Stephen King novel, that somebody could automatically assume that magic is involved and that a curse has been put upon you, because I think a lot of other people's minds would go other places other than thinking that a curse had been put on them. But that's good, it's like the premise is put down fairly quickly, like that he thinks that that's what it is. So he wants to go and talk about this with other people that were concerned in the accident because he feels like it's to do with this accident. So he thinks that, you know, I will go and see Carrie Rossington, who was the judge, and talk to him about it. Goes round to Carrie Rossington's house, and his wife answers and says that Carrie is not there. She's really angry, she's drinking, if not already drunk. And she eventually admits, you know, that he has started to turn into a lizard, she thinks. Like, his skin has gone really, really scaly. Beyond like anything like eczema or psoriasis that could possibly, you know, be diagnosed. She's like, he genuinely, I feel like he's turning into an alligator or a lizard. and he's gone off to some resort somewhere for treatment, but nothing is really making a difference. And she's really angry at Bill. She's like, why have you brought this to us? You're the person who hit the lady. You know, you killed somebody, not me. You know, which, whilst this is true, it's potentially a little bit unfair, because obviously that corruption existed in that triangle, I think, between the judge, the police chief and the lawyer, Bill. But obviously she doesn't want to take any responsibility on behalf of her husband for his doing in it. So she's basically like, don't come back, I don't want to see you again. So Bill leaves. He also tries to talk to Duncan Hopley, who is the police chief, about this. And he goes around to Duncan's house, and Duncan doesn't want to let him in either. He's pretty angry as well. He eventually lets Bill in, and they have a conversation, but Duncan's sat in the dark at the back of the room. And then he eventually puts a light on so that Bill can see him, and he's absolutely covered in spots everywhere, like cysts, boils, absolutely covering his face, his neck, his arms. You know, he hasn't been to work for days, and he's obviously very distressed about the way that he looks. And it's way more than some kind of severe acne. It's, well, yeah, it's like he's been cursed. And Bill sort of says to Duncan what he thinks has happened. He thinks that, you know, they've been cursed because he said, I was touched by this person. And he reveals that Carrie Rossington's wife had said that he had also been touched. So he says to Duncan, did he touch you? And he said yes, he had touched him, and he believes also that he might have been cursed. But Duncan is very accepting in a way of what has happened to him. You know, he tries to put Bill in his place, and he says, you know, you've no right to be angry at this man. You killed this woman who was his daughter, and you know, you deserve what's coming to you. I deserve what's coming to me. And Bill doesn't really want to take that. He's like, well, no, because in the daylight, yes, I lost concentration, but she stepped out in front of the car. She wasn't looking where she was going, you know. So I'm going to find this man, and I'm going to make him take the curse off me. I'll try and get him to take it off all of us, you know. But Duncan doesn't really think that that's going to happen. And after Bill leaves Duncan then actually kills himself a few days later. So this is where, you know, the story is really set in the beginning. Is these three men have been cursed by Tadut Lemk, who is the father of the victim, Susanna. And it seems to be not the same curse. They're not really sure like why these things have been picked for them. But Bill is losing weight. Duncan is just face is falling apart with spots and the rest of his body, and Carrie is turning into a lizard by the look of it, like with skin problems. So it's a bit of a weird bunch of things to happen to those three people, but we don't really follow the two anymore after that. We're really just concerned with Bill and Bill's weight loss. And I think part of that as well, when Bill goes outside into public, other people who don't know him don't really notice, because, you know, for the most part, like, he just looks like a man who's slightly overweight instead of really overweight, and then he loses weight to the point where he's just an average weight. And it's really only at the end of the book, when his weight loss is so severe, when he's lost about 140 pounds, I think he eventually loses, and he's like skeletal, that people really sort of look at him and think, stay away from me. Whereas with the other two, their disorders are pretty visual, and so yeah, that's why Duncan ends up locking himself in a house, and Carrie goes into some clinic because he doesn't want people to see him, because it's very obvious to the public something's a bit off with you. So anyway, Bill has the opportunity, if you like, to go and find this man and get him to take the curse off. So he's tracked down who this man is, and essentially he's from a gypsy encampment who move around. So they'd been through Connecticut, and that's where he had been. Well, he'd actually seen this gypsy encampment before the court case, and then they had moved on after the court case. So he needs to locate where they are so he can find the man who's put the curse on him and talk him around into taking it off. But they're actually not that easy to find. They've been travelling for about 2 weeks by the time Bill decides that he's going to try and find them. So he, you know, confides in Heidi what he thinks going on, confides in his doctor what he thinks is going on, that he's got a curse, and neither of them believe him. You know, he also confides, you know, I have to go and find this guy and ask him to take his curse off me, and they think that he's absolutely lost his mind. So their thought is, actually, we need to get him committed. They did send him to a specialist about his weight loss, and the specialist all got really excited, thinking there was something exotic wrong with him, some case of something that they had not witnessed before. So they were very interested to get him into hospital and take notes on him. But he knew that he was running out of time, because at the rate he was losing weight, actually, if he didn't find this gypsy encampment and this man soon, his life would be over, because obviously he would get to a certain weight and obviously he's going to die. Like, you can't, you know, he's probably about 6 foot. This guy, you know, can't live at like 100 pounds. So he refuses the treatment that's being offered to him, which really annoys his family, and it really annoys his current doctor. So Bill tells him, you know, I have to go and find this man. They're like, no, you can't do this. So he goes off anyway. Like, he leaves the house, leaves a note, says that that's what he's going to do, and carries off on a journey. So he starts heading north because he hears that this gypsy camp may be going towards Maine for the summer. So yeah, off he goes. He meanwhile is sort of staying a bit off grid on his way. He doesn't want anyone to like stop him. He's a little bit worried about what Heidi might do to try to stop him. And as it transpires, she has actually spoken to some other people, and she has now enacted, like in the UK, I think it's called the Mental Health Act, where essentially you can have somebody, you can have them hospitalised against their will under the Mental Health Act. Actually, it's called a section, and that's appears in American terminology what she seems to have put out on him. So he's now a wanted person that people think is insane. So she's not supportive at all of what he thinks is going on with him, and neither is his doctor. So he has to go really undercover to try and find this band of gypsies. So he decides to call on an old friend of his called Richard Ginelli, who is has a mob connection in New York. And from what I can work out in the book, the law firm that Bill works for had done some work for him in the mob. So he's actually friends, Rob and Richard, sorry, and Bill are good friends from a long time ago. So Richard is like, yes, of course, if you're in trouble, I'll come from New York and I'll come and meet you, because actually if you're going from Connecticut to Maine, New York is like somewhere in between the two. So Richard comes up to help Bill, and they track down this gypsy camp, and the first time that Bill goes in there, no luck, you know, they're very hostile towards him. Susanna had a daughter called Gina Lemke, and she's very, very hostile towards Bill, you know, and sort of is quite violent, and threatens him with violence. So Bill decides that he needs to sort of get back at them on their own terms, so he then says that he's going to curse them. So what he and Richard do over a series of days, essentially, is they try to do things which will scare all the people in the gypsy camp, so they can try and scare Taduts into removing the curse off Bill. It gets quite violent in some situations, and there is one death, I think, and essentially Taduts is like, I'm not going to let you intimidate me. But as this goes on, and essentially I think it's Richard threatens Gina's life, so in the end Taduts decide, yes, okay, I'll meet you about removing this curse. So after there's a violent altercation, I think between Gina and Bill, Bill then goes to a park to meet Taduts about this curse. And actually what it's about, and Taduts is talking to him, is that he said that the curse he'd given to Bill is to make him take the blame. Nobody had took the blame for them taking his daughter away. You know, they were all corrupt, and they just thought, oh, you know, it's just an old woman, it's just a gypsy, she doesn't matter. You know, we're not going to ruin Bill's life. And actually, you know, consequently his actions had ruined other people's lives who had a relationship with this woman, Susanna. You know, so Taduts is like, I've made you take the blame, but you don't seem to want to take the blame. So here's a pie. And the pie that he gives him is like a strawberry pie or a cherry pie or something. And that's meant to represent the curse, essentially. Like, and it's beating like it's got a heartbeat. And he takes Bill's hand and he cuts it, and he pours some of Bill's blood into this pie, and then his pie heals over, and this looks like a normal pie, you know. And he's like, okay, You've put the blame into the pie now, which is represents the curse. You need to go and give the blame to somebody else, because somebody must take the blame for what happened to my daughter. You know, which eye for an eye basically is what the story is about. So Bill eventually goes home. He calls his wife, tells him that he's coming home. He's obviously not very happy with his wife because she hasn't been supportive really through all of this. She doesn't really understand that he feels upset about what he actually did to Susanna Lemp. And then he's obviously been distressed by the curse and the losing weight. And then he's obviously distressed then by the fact that she wouldn't listen to him, and then she, you know, had him like followed almost by various people that he knew him, like his old boss and a private detective, you know, to try and get him sectioned, to put him away rather than listen to him. So she's not exactly his favourite person. So he gets home and he's got this pie that he needs to give to somebody, and when he gives the blame to somebody with that pie, when they eat it, then the curse will be theirs and he will be free of the curse. So, you know, he could have left the pie in public and had a stranger eat the pie, and he could have just given the curse and the blame to somebody else, but that's not actually what he does. He takes the pie home with him. So you can sort of see like where this is going now. So he gets home, he sees Heidi, he says, I'm really, really tired, I'm going to bed, but I've left your favourite pie downstairs, strawberry pie. So clearly he's going to give it to her, and I know that like he talks throughout the book about how annoyed he is that she actually committed this act on him when she did at that time, because it's just not something she'd ever done before, you know, and she's never really said sorry for it. She's never like, sorry that I distracted you and you hit somebody with your car. You know, because he never asked her to do this act and she actually started it, and she seems to have got away scot-free, and I think that, you know, that really, really bothers him, which is why he's chosen, you know, I'm going to give her the pie, because actually, even now I'm home, I don't think I can forgive her for how she's been to me since, even though I took all the blame for her in court. So yeah, he's lying in bed and he hears the cupboard doors open and he hears the plates rattling, and he's thinking, she's eaten the pie, and he accepts what he's done. But it's not quite that simple, because when he wakes up in the morning, he realises there's 2 plates, and his daughter, who he thought wasn't at home, had actually come home after he had gone to bed, and his wife had said, oh, Linda, do you want some strawberry pie? And Linda said, yeah, sure. So it comes full circle, and he's inadvertently given the curse to his daughter. So now he's given it to his wife on purpose, and he's given it to his daughter. So obviously now we could say that Taduts has taken Bill's daughter from him, as Bill took Taduts' daughter from him. But again, you just think, well, that's absolutely terrible, and it's a great ending to do that. But then after that, when Bill realises that, like, well, you know, his wife is going to be lost to a curse, now his daughter's going to be lost to a curse, and he really, really loves his daughter, so this was terrible, because he thought it was just going to be him and his daughter after he'd managed to get rid of his wife with this curse. He just thinks, oh, sod it, and he sits down and he eats some of the pie as well. Now, I don't really know, because we don't hear any more from the ending after that, so we don't know if the curse that gets put on his wife and his daughter is the same one that's put on him, and that they lose a horrific amount of weight and die that way, or if they have a different curse put on them, depending on their circumstances. So the other 2 that had been cursed, who were involved in this like little corrupt law triangle, they didn't have the same curse put on them, but apparently the one who was dying of, you know, all these excess spots taking over him, he had actually suffered from adult acne throughout his whole life, according to the doctor eventually. So in a way that curse was representative of something that man had suffered. So we know that, for example, Heidi smokes throughout it, so you just kind of wonder, the curse that befalls her, maybe it's something to do with smoking or something like that. And obviously with his daughter, like, don't really know. Or do they all just become really thin and lose weight that way? And I suppose the other thought that I had about this at the end was, would Bill actually get the curse again? Because technically he gave the curse away, and he gave it to somebody that he chose to, but then the curse actually got shared. The old man Tudutz never said anything about what happens if you share the curse, share the blame, which is what has inadvertently happened by Linda eating some of the pie. So he's actually, blamed somebody and then inadvertently, accidentally blamed his daughter, and now he's actually taken some of the blame himself by eating the pie. But I don't know if by the fact that they ate the pie first, if they've now actually taken the curse from him, or if he's able to reshare in the curse after they've taken it. So I'm not really sure. That's an open ending, but I kind of like that. I think that the ending was really, really good. It gave a nice twist, and it was. I think the most horrifying thing about it is like this study on human character and what people who apparently love each other are prepared to do to each other. So, Billy's prepared to throw his wife under a bus, essentially, and Bill's wife, I think she did probably what she thought was best for Bill, but I have to admit through I was disliking her because I thought she wouldn't even give him a chance, and I thought that it was a bit strong to try and have him committed under the Mental Health Act, rather than just simply listening to him. And you do think sometimes things could be resolved if you just let the guy find the guy, have a conversation, and then he'd probably agree to go into care afterwards. So yeah, I thought she could have been a more supportive wife, although I'm not sure she fully deserved what she got. But then at the end of the day, she did also distract him while he was driving, and it's pretty obvious if you're going to do something to somebody while they're in charge of a moving vehicle like that, that something really serious could happen, which it did. So actually maybe she did get the end that she deserved. And I think that Bill, if Bill did get recursed again, then he obviously got the end that he deserved as well, because essentially, he and his wife did take another person's life inadvertently. It was manslaughter, but they did it, and they didn't really repent enough, so this curse will make them repent. But the daughter, obviously Linda, is completely innocent in the same way that Susanna was. And I think that's where this story comes full circle, really, where it's like eye for an eye. But yeah, I thought that it was a really, really good Stephen King book. Well, it was actually Richard Bachman, but obviously the mind of Stephen King wrote it. So yeah, let me know what you think of Thinner. Did you enjoy it as much as me? Is it one that you would rate really highly, or did you just not enjoy the story as much? So I will see you all again on the next review. Bye!